The air in America during the early 1960s was thick with tension, a cauldron of hope and dread simmering beneath the surface of a nation poised on the edge of transformation. The Cold War cast long shadows, its icy grip tightening around every city, every home, every whispered conversation. Fear of communism, of nuclear annihilation, and of a world spiraling toward chaos haunted the collective psyche. In this restless era, one man stood as a beacon of promise, a figure whose charisma and vision seemed to hold the fracturing dreams of a nation together. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States. But in the darkness of that same era, another figure lurked, a man whose name would become synonymous with infamy, whose actions would shatter history in a single, deafening moment. His name was Lee Harvey Oswald, and on November 22, 1963, in Dallas, Texas, their paths would collide in a tragedy that would leave the world reeling, its echoes still reverberating through time, shrouded in mystery and dread. John F. Kennedy was more than a president, he was a symbol. Young, vibrant, and impossibly charismatic, he embodied the hope of a new America. With his piercing blue eyes, his Boston accent sharp as a blade, and a smile that could disarm even the most cynical, JFK was a man who seemed to defy the weight of the world's darkness. Elected in 1960 at the age of 43, he was the youngest president in American history, a Catholic in a Protestant nation, a leader who dared to dream of a future where equality, progress, and peace might prevail. His speeches stirred hearts. His promises of a new frontier ignited imaginations, and his defiance of Soviet aggression during the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 cemented his image as a resolute commander-in-chief. Yet, beneath the polished surface of Camelot, the romantic mythos spun around his presidency. Enemies circled. Powerful forces, both domestic and foreign, bristled at his policies, his charm, his very existence. The CIA, stung by the Bay of Pigs fiasco, whispered of betrayal. The military-industrial complex, wary of his reluctance to escalate in Vietnam, simmered with resentment. Segregationists in the South seethed at his support for civil rights. And somewhere in the vast, shadowy network of global espionage, others watched, waiting for a moment to strike. Kennedy's life was a paradox. A man of privilege born into wealth, yet one who seemed to understand the struggles of the common American. His family, the Kennedys, were a dynasty steeped in ambition and tragedy, their wealth and influence rivaled only by their knack for attracting calamity. His older brother, Joseph Jr., had died in a fiery plane explosion during World War II. His sister, Kathleen, perished in a crash years later. And JFK himself, plagued by chronic health issues, had stared death in the face more than once, surviving Addison's disease and back surgeries that left him in constant pain. Yet he carried himself with an almost supernatural grace, his public persona masking the private torments that gnawed at him. To the world, he was untouchable, a leader who could steer America through the terrors of the nuclear age. But to those who watched from the shadows, he was a target, a man whose ideals threatened too many vested interests, whose vision of change stirred too much unrest. Enter Lee Harvey Oswald, a figure so enigmatic, so unsettling, that his very existence seems like a riddle carved in darkness. Born in New Orleans in 1939, Oswald was a drifter, a loner, a man who seemed to belong nowhere and to no one. His childhood was a fractured mosaic of neglect and instability. His father dead before he was born, his mother a cold, erratic presence who shuffled him between homes and schools. By his teens, Oswald was already a puzzle, a boy who devoured Marxist literature while idolizing the military, who craved significance in a world that barely noticed him. At 17, he joined the Marines, where he trained as a marksman, his skill with a rifle eerie in its precision. But even there, he was an outsider, mocked by peers, disciplined for insubordination, his mind drifting toward radical ideologies. In 1959, he defected to the Soviet Union, declaring his allegiance to communism and renouncing his American citizenship, a move that shocked those who knew him, though few truly did. The Soviets, wary of his erratic behavior, kept him at arm's length, assigning him a menial job in a Minsk factory. Disillusioned, he returned to the United States in 1962, trailing a cloud of suspicion and a Russian wife, Marina, whose own enigmatic presence would later fuel countless theories. Oswald's life in America was a descent into obscurity and resentment. He bounced between low-paying jobs, his Marxist ideals clashing with the capitalist reality of Dallas and New Orleans. He was a man adrift, his mind a labyrinth of grievances, against society, against authority, against a world that refused to recognize his self-proclaimed greatness. In April 1963, he allegedly attempted to assassinate Edwin Walker, a far-right retired general, firing a shot that narrowly missed its mark. The act, if true, was a chilling prelude, a glimpse into the violence brewing within him. Yet Oswald was no simple villain. He was a cipher, a man whose motives remain maddeningly elusive. Was he driven by ideology, a fervent belief in communism that saw Kennedy as a symbol of American imperialism? Was it personal, a twisted need to etch his name into history, to escape the anonymity that suffocated him? Or was he a pawn, manipulated by forces far larger than himself, shadowy groups with their own agendas, whispering in the dark? The America of 1963 was a tinderbox, and Kennedy's presidency was the spark that could ignite it. The civil rights movement was tearing at the nation's seams, with protests and violence erupting across the South. The Cold War loomed like a specter, the Cuban Missile Crisis still fresh in the public's mind, a near-apocalypse that had left nerves frayed and trust in government shaky. The CIA, the FBI, the Mafia, anti-Castro exiles, and even elements within the U.S. government harbored grudges against Kennedy. His push for détente with the Soviets infuriated hardline anti-communists. His crackdown on organized crime alienated the Mafia, who had once aided his election through backroom deals. His refusal to fully commit to a war in Vietnam frustrated military leaders hungry for escalation. And in Dallas, a city known for its conservative fervor, Kennedy was viewed with suspicion, even hatred by some. Flyers circulated before his visit, accusing him of treason, of selling out America to the communists. The air was thick with vitriol, and the stage was set for tragedy. Oswald, in his own way, was a product of this fractured America. His obsession with communism, his flirtations with pro-Castro groups, and his erratic behavior painted a portrait of a man searching for purpose in a world that seemed to reject him at every turn. By November 1963, he was working at the Texas School Book Depository, a nondescript job in a nondescript building overlooking Dealey Plaza, a place that would soon become the epicenter of a national nightmare. Did he act alone, driven by a warped need for infamy? Or was he a cog in a larger machine, a patsy manipulated by conspirators whose true identities remain hidden in the shadows? The motives swirl like ghosts, political, personal, ideological, or something far darker. Some whispered of the CIA, furious over Kennedy's handling of the Bay of Pigs. Others pointed to the Mafia, eager to eliminate a president who threatened their empire. Anti-Castro Cubans, betrayed by Kennedy's refusal to invade Cuba, had their own reasons for vengeance. And then there were the Soviets, or perhaps rogue elements within the U.S. itself, plotting in secret to upend the fragile balance of power. The truth, if it exists, is buried beneath layers of deception, half-truths, and unanswered questions. Kennedy, the Golden President, was a man who inspired love and loathing in equal measure. Oswald, the troubled loner, was a walking contradiction, a man whose actions would plunge a nation into grief and suspicion. Together, they were the catalyst for a moment that would freeze time, a moment when the world stopped and gasped, when the promise of Camelot crumbled under the weight of a sniper's bullet. As November 22, 1963, dawned in Dallas, the city buzzed with anticipation for the president's visit. But beneath the surface, something sinister stirred, a force that would unleash chaos, leaving behind a wound that has never healed, a mystery that continues to haunt. The stage was set, the players in place, and history was about to turn on a single, terrifying instant. The sun hung high over Dallas, Texas, on November 22, 1963, bathing the city in a deceptively warm glow, as if the heavens themselves were unaware of the darkness about to unfold. Dealey Plaza, a modest triangle of green framed by concrete and history, buzzed with anticipation. Crowds lined the streets, their faces alight with the electric thrill of seeing him. John F. Kennedy, the Golden President, whose charisma seemed to pulse through the very air. Women in pastel dresses craned their necks, their eyes sparkling with adoration, while men adjusted their hats, murmuring about the young leader who dared to challenge the world's chaos. The motorcade snaked through the city, a gleaming procession of power and promise, with JFK and his wife, Jacqueline, at its heart. She was a vision in pink, her Chanel suit a vibrant splash against the black Lincoln convertible, her smile radiant yet tinged with a quiet, enigmatic grace. The couple waved to the crowd, their hands moving in sync, their connection palpable, a magnetic dance of love and legacy that captivated every onlooker. But high above, in the shadowed perch of the Texas School Book Depository, a pair of cold eyes watched. A finger rested on a trigger, and in a single, shattering moment, the world would change forever. The clock ticked toward 12:30 p.m., each second heavy with unspoken menace. The motorcade turned onto Elm Street, gliding into Dealey Plaza with the precision of a choreographed ballet. Kennedy sat in the open car, his broad shoulders relaxed, his profile sharp against the bright Texas sky. Beside him, Jackie glowed, her elegance a stark contrast to the utilitarian surroundings. The grassy knoll to their left, the stark brick of the depository to their right. Secret Service agents scanned the crowd, their eyes darting, senses honed, yet blind to the danger lurking 6 stories above. In the depository's southeast corner, Lee Harvey Oswald crouched by a window, his Mannlicher Carcano rifle steady in his hands. His breath was shallow, his pulse a drumbeat of resolve. The man who had drifted through life, rejected by his country, his peers, even his own dreams, now held history in his crosshairs. Was it hatred that steadied his aim? A twisted hunger for infamy? Or was he merely a puppet, his strings pulled by unseen hands in a conspiracy too vast to comprehend? The rifle's barrel glinted faintly, a silent promise of chaos. The first shot rang out, a crack that split the air like a thunderbolt. It was 12:30 p.m. The crowd froze, their cheers dissolving into a collective gasp. The bullet missed, some say, ricocheting off a street sign or a curb, its path a fleeting warning of the horror to come. Kennedy turned slightly, his brow furrowing, as if sensing the invisible threat. Jackie's hand tightened on his arm, her eyes wide with sudden dread. Before anyone could react, a second shot exploded from the depository. This one found its mark. The bullet tore through Kennedy's upper back, exiting his throat in a spray of crimson that stained Jackie's pink suit. The president's hands flew to his neck, his body slumping forward, a guttural choke escaping his lips. The crowd screamed, a primal wail that echoed off the plaza's concrete walls. Secret Service agent Clint Hill sprang into action, his body a blur as he lunged toward the limousine, but time seemed to slow, each second stretching into eternity. Oswald, his face a mask of cold determination, chambered another round. The third shot, the fatal one, ripped through the air, striking Kennedy in the head. A grotesque mist of blood and bone erupted, painting the car's interior in a macabre tableau. Jackie screamed, her voice raw, as she climbed onto the trunk, reaching for a fragment of her husband's skull, her movements frantic, almost feral, as if she could somehow pull him back from the abyss. The limousine roared forward, its driver flooring the accelerator as it sped toward Parkland Memorial Hospital. Chaos engulfed Dealey Plaza. Spectators dove for cover, some clutching children, others staring in numb disbelief at the blood-streaked pavement. The grassy knoll, once a benign patch of green, now loomed like a haunted specter, with whispers of a second shooter already taking root in the minds of witnesses. Had there been another flash of movement there, another glint of metal? The air was thick with panic, the scent of gunpowder mingling with the coppery tang of blood. Radios crackled with urgent voices, police officers shouting orders as they swarmed the plaza. Above it all, the Texas School Book Depository stood silent, its 6th-floor window an empty eye staring down at the carnage below. Oswald was already moving, his rifle hidden among stacks of books, his footsteps quick and deliberate. He slipped down the stairs, his face betraying nothing. No triumph, no fear, only the eerie calm of a man who had just shattered a nation. In the limousine, Jackie cradled her husband's broken head, her gloved hands slick with blood, her eyes hollow with grief. "They've killed him," she whispered to no one, her voice a fragile thread in the storm of sirens and screams. At Parkland Hospital, doctors worked frantically, their faces grim as they battled the impossible. Kennedy's wounds were catastrophic, his brain irreparably damaged, his life slipping away with every futile stitch. At 1 p.m., he was pronounced dead, though the world would not know for another agonizing hour. The news spread like wildfire, a shockwave that rippled from Dallas to Washington, D.C., to the farthest corners of the globe. In homes across America, televisions flickered with breaking news, anchors choking back tears as they announced the unthinkable: the president was gone. Church bells tolled, flags drooped to half-mast, and a collective wail rose from a nation plunged into mourning. The promise of Camelot, so bright just hours before, lay in ruins, its king felled by an assassin's bullet. Meanwhile, Oswald was a ghost in motion. He fled the depository minutes after the shooting, his movements swift but calculated. He boarded a bus, then a taxi, his eyes scanning for pursuers, his mind racing with the weight of what he had done, or what he had been made to do. At his boarding house in Oak Cliff, he retrieved a .38 revolver, a small, deadly companion for a man now hunted by an entire city. The streets of Dallas buzzed with sirens, police radios crackling with descriptions of a slender white male, approximately 30, 5'10". Oswald's pulse quickened as he walked, his jacket concealing the weapon, his thoughts a tangled web of defiance and dread. Had he acted alone, driven by a warped need to etch his name into history? Or was he a scapegoat, a man set up to take the fall for a plot far grander than his own fractured ambitions? The questions hung in the air, as heavy as the Texas heat. The chaos was not confined to Dallas. In Washington, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson was whisked to Air Force One, his face ashen as he prepared to assume a presidency he never wanted under such circumstances. Rumors swirled of a communist plot, a Soviet strike, or even a coup within the government itself. The Cold War's shadow loomed larger than ever, each whisper of conspiracy stoking fears of a nation on the brink. On television, Walter Cronkite's voice broke as he confirmed Kennedy's death, his glasses removed to wipe away tears, a moment seared into the nation's memory. In New York, stock markets plummeted. In Moscow, leaders watched with wary eyes. In Havana, Fidel Castro paused, sensing the tides of history shifting. The world held its breath, waiting for answers that might never come. Back in Dallas, the net was closing around Oswald. A police bulletin described the suspect, and a shoe store clerk's sharp eyes caught a man slipping into the Texas Theater without paying. Officer J.D. Tippit, patrolling Oak Cliff, spotted Oswald and stopped to question him. The encounter was brief, brutal. Oswald drew his revolver, firing 4 shots that left Tippit dead on the street, his body crumpled in a pool of blood. Witnesses screamed, pointing at the fleeing figure. Oswald ducked into the theater, the darkness of the cinema a temporary refuge. But the police were relentless. Sirens converged, officers stormed the building, and at 1:40 p.m., Oswald was cornered. He raised his gun, shouting, "This is it," before being overpowered, his wrists cuffed, his fate sealed, at least for the moment. As he was dragged into the light, his eyes burned with defiance, but his voice was silent. The nation watched, breathless, as the man accused of killing their president was paraded before cameras, a figure both ordinary and monstrous. The tension in Dallas reached a fever pitch, then began to ebb as Oswald sat in custody, his motives a riddle wrapped in silence. The city, the nation, the world grappled with the void left by Kennedy's death. Dealey Plaza, now a crime scene, was cordoned off, its grassy knoll and blood-stained pavement etched into history. Witnesses recounted conflicting stories. Some swore they heard shots from the knoll, others from the depository alone. The rifle, found among the book stacks, bore Oswald's fingerprints, but questions lingered. 3 shots. For a lone gunman, or a conspiracy woven by unseen hands? The drama of that day, its heart-pounding horror, its visceral grief, gave way to a restless unease, a hunger for truth that would fuel decades of debate. For now, the nation mourned, its pulse still racing from the shock, its eyes fixed on the man in custody and the shadows that seemed to dance behind him. The streets of Dallas pulsed with a raw, Electric panic on November 22, 1963, as the echo of gunfire in Dealey Plaza reverberated through the city like a death knell. The president was dead, his blood still wet on the leather seats of the Lincoln convertible, and the nation stood frozen, its heart ripped open. But one man moved with purpose, slipping through the chaos like a shadow cast by a storm. Lee Harvey Oswald, the enigma whose name would soon sear itself into history, was on the run. His steps were quick, his eyes darting. A predator turned prey in a city that had become a hunting ground. The air was thick with sirens, their wails slicing through the Texas heat. A relentless chorus chasing a man who carried the weight of a nation's grief in his pocket. Every glance over his shoulder, every bead of sweat on his brow, told a story of desperation, defiance, and something darker, a secret that seemed to flicker in his gaze, teasing the world with questions it might never answer. Was he a lone killer, driven by a twisted hunger for infamy? Or was he a pawn, fleeing a trap set by forces far greater than himself? The chase was on, and Dallas was a stage set for a drama that would grip the world in a fever of fear and fascination. Oswald's escape from the Texas School Book Depository was a masterclass in calculated evasion, as if he had rehearsed every step in the shadowed corners of his mind. Minutes after the shots that felled Kennedy, he was already descending the building's stairs, his face a mask of eerie calm. The sixth-floor sniper's nest, with its hastily stacked boxes and abandoned Mannlicher-Carcano rifle, was a crime scene frozen in time, but Oswald was a ghost, slipping past co-workers who barely noticed him. One employee, Charles Givens, later recalled seeing him on the first floor, sipping a Coke with an almost unnatural nonchalance, as if the world hadn't just shattered. "Just another day," he might have muttered, his voice low, his eyes avoiding contact. But his heart must have pounded, a traitor beneath his cool exterior, as he stepped out into the Dallas sunlight. The city was waking to its own horror, police radios crackling with descriptions of a slender white male, about 30, 5'10", brown hair. Oswald knew the net was tightening, but he moved with the grace of a man who had nothing left to lose, or everything to hide. He boarded a bus on Elm Street, its crowded interior a temporary shield. The passengers, unaware of the monster in their midst, chattered nervously about the shooting, their voices a cacophony of shock and speculation. Oswald sat near the back, his hands folded, his gaze fixed on the window, watching the city blur past. The bus crawled through traffic, slowed by the chaos erupting in Dealey Plaza's wake. Sirens screamed closer, and Oswald's jaw tightened. He couldn't stay here, trapped in this metal cage with eyes that might soon turn accusing. He slipped off at the next stop, his movements fluid, almost sensual in their precision, like a dancer stepping off a stage. A taxi was his next refuge, its driver oblivious to the history unfolding in his back seat. Oswald directed him to Oak Cliff, a working-class neighborhood where he rented a room under the alias O.H. Lee. The name was a lie, like so much of his life, a facade hiding a man who seemed to exist only in fragments. At his boarding house on North Beckley Avenue, Oswald's pace quickened, his calm fracturing under the weight of pursuit. The housekeeper, Earlene Roberts, watched him burst through the door, his breath ragged, his eyes wild with something she couldn't name. Fear, perhaps, or the thrill of a man dancing on the edge of oblivion. He grabbed a jacket and a .38 revolver, tucking the cold steel against his body, its weight a dark promise. "You in a hurry today, Mr. Lee?" Roberts called, her voice tinged with curiosity. He didn't answer, his silhouette vanishing into the afternoon light. The revolver was no mere precaution, it was a declaration. Oswald was armed, dangerous, and ready to fight, or to silence anyone who stood in his way. The streets of Oak Cliff became his labyrinth, each corner a potential trap, each passerby a witness to his unraveling. The city was alive with pursuit, police cruisers weaving through traffic, their lights flashing like the eyes of some relentless beast. And Oswald, the hunted, moved with a predator's instinct, his every step a dare to fate. The tension exploded at 1:15 p.m. on a quiet street in Oak Cliff. Patrolman J.D. Tippett, a 39-year-old officer with a kind face and a steady hand, spotted a man matching the suspect description. Tippett, a family man who patrolled these streets with a quiet pride, pulled his cruiser alongside Oswald. The moment was electric, charged with the weight of destiny. Tippett leaned out, his voice calm but firm. "Hey you, come here a second." Oswald approached, his hands in his pockets, his eyes unreadable. What passed between them was brief, a fleeting exchange of words lost to history. Then, in a heartbeat, the air shattered. Oswald drew his revolver, its barrel gleaming in the sunlight, and fired 4 shots in rapid succession. The bullets tore through Tippett's chest, each one a brutal punctuation mark. The officer crumpled to the pavement, blood pooling beneath him, his eyes wide with the shock of betrayal. Witnesses screamed, their voices piercing the suburban calm. A mother pushing a stroller, a mechanic wiping grease from his hands, a teenager frozen on his porch. Oswald didn't pause. He ejected the spent shells, their metallic clink a chilling echo, and sprinted away, his figure a blur of defiance against the backdrop of a neighborhood now stained with blood. The chase intensified, Dallas transforming into a city possessed. Police radios buzzed with urgency, descriptions of the fleeing suspect crackling through the static. "Officer down. 10th Street in Patton. Suspect heading west." Civilians pointed the way, their fingers trembling as they directed officers toward a man who seemed to vanish into the city's folds. Oswald's breath came in sharp gasps, his legs burning as he ducked down alleys and side streets. His mind must have raced, a kaleidoscope of fear and calculation. Was he running toward freedom, or merely delaying the inevitable? The Texas Theater, a squat brick building showing war as hell, loomed ahead like a sanctuary. Oswald slipped inside, his $1 ticket forgotten in his haste, the darkness of the cinema swallowing him whole. The usher, Johnny Brewer, noticed the man's hurried entrance, his gut whispering that something was wrong. Outside, the wail of sirens grew louder, a noose tightening around Oak Cliff. Inside the theater, the flickering screen cast shadows over rows of empty seats, the war movie's gunfire an ironic backdrop to the real drama unfolding. Oswald sat low, his eyes scanning the exits, his hand resting on the revolver. The air was heavy with the scent of popcorn and anticipation, but for Oswald, it was a cage. At 1:40 p.m., the light snapped on, and the theater erupted with the sound of boots on carpet. Dallas police stormed in, their flashlights cutting through the gloom, their guns drawn. "Get up now," an officer barked. Oswald rose, his movements slow, almost deliberate, as if savoring the final act of his performance. "This is it," he shouted, raising his revolver, but the officers were faster. They swarmed him, a tangle of arms and fury, wrestling the gun from his grip. His wrists snapped into handcuffs, the cold metal a final verdict. As they dragged him into the blinding sunlight, cameras flashed, capturing the face of a man who seemed both ordinary and monstrous, a pale, slight figure with dark eyes that burned with secrets. The nation watched, breathless, as Oswald was paraded before the world, his defiance a stark contrast to the grief consuming America. But the drama was far from over. 2 days later, on November 24th, 1963, another figure emerged from the shadows, a nightclub owner named Jack Ruby, his face a mask of rage and purpose. As Oswald was led through the basement of Dallas Police Headquarters for a transfer to county jail, Ruby stepped forward, his .38 Colt Cobra gleaming in the dim light. The scene was chaos, reporters shouting, cameras rolling, officers jostling. Ruby, a man with ties to the underworld and a fierce loyalty to Kennedy, saw his moment. "You killed my president, you rat," he growled, and fired a single shot. The bullet tore into Oswald's abdomen, a fatal strike that sent him crumpling to the floor, his eyes wide with shock. The basement erupted in pandemonium, officers tackling Ruby, reporters scrambling for footage, the air thick with the stench of gunpowder and betrayal. Oswald was rushed to Parkland Hospital, the same hospital where Kennedy had died, but it was too late. At 1:07 p.m., he was gone, his secrets silenced forever. The tension that had gripped Dallas for 2 days broke like a fever, leaving behind a city, a nation, reeling in disbelief. Oswald's flight, his violent clash with Tippett, his capture in the darkened theater, and his shocking murder by Ruby were a whirlwind of high-stakes drama. each moment more surreal than the last. The nation was left with fragments, a rifle, a revolver, a trail of bodies, and 1,000 questions. Why did Ruby act? Was it grief, or something more sinister? An order to silence a man who knew too much? The streets of Dallas grew quiet, but the whispers of conspiracy grew louder, their tendrils snaking through the years. The chase was over, but the mystery was just beginning, a seductive enigma that would haunt the world for decades, its shadows dancing in the corners of every mind. The air in Dallas was heavy with grief and suspicion on November 24th, 1963, 2 days after the shots that shattered a nation in Dealey Plaza. The city, still reeling from the murder of its president, John F. Kennedy, had become a crucible of rage, fear, and unanswered questions. Lee Harvey Oswald, the man accused of pulling the trigger, sat in a Dallas police cell, his dark eyes burning with a defiance that seemed to mock the chaos he had unleashed. His capture in the Texas theater had been a spectacle, a moment of high drama that played out before a stunned world. But now, as he faced interrogation, the spotlight burned hotter. Who was this man, this slender figure with a smirk that hinted at secrets too dangerous to speak? Was he the lone assassin, a twisted soul driven by a hunger for infamy? Or was he a pawn, caught in a web of conspiracy so vast it could topple empires? The nation leaned in, breathless, as the clock ticked toward a moment that would silence Oswald forever and ignite a fire of doubt that still burns today. The stage was set for a final act, one that would leave the world gasping, its curiosity stoked by a mystery that refused to die. Oswald's time in custody was a dance of shadows and half-truths. Dragged from the darkened theater, his wrists bound, he had faced a gauntlet of reporters, their flashbulbs popping like gunfire, capturing the face of a man who seemed both ordinary and monstrous. "I didn't kill anybody," he shouted, his voice sharp, almost theatrical, as officers hustled him into the Dallas police headquarters. The interrogation room was a stark, fluorescent-lit box, its walls closing in as detectives pressed him for answers. Oswald was a cipher, his responses a mix of defiance and evasion. "I'm just a patsy," he declared, his words dripping with a chilling ambiguity that sent shivers down the spines of those who heard them. A patsy for whom? The question hung in the air, heavy with menace. He admitted to being in the Texas schoolbook depository, to owning a rifle, but denied firing the shots that killed Kennedy and Officer J.D. Tippit. His story shifted like sand, each answer a tease, each denial a spark that fueled suspicion. Detectives leaned closer, their voices low and urgent, sensing that the truth, if it existed, was slipping through their fingers like smoke. Outside, the nation was unraveling. Television screens flickered with images of a grieving Jacqueline Kennedy, her pink suit now a relic of horror, stained with her husband's blood. Crowds gathered at churches, their prayers mingling with whispers of conspiracy, communists, the CIA, the mafia, even rogue elements within the government itself. Dallas, a city already steeped in conservative fervor, became a pressure cooker, its streets alive with rumors and rage. The police headquarters buzzed with activity, reporters jostling for scraps of information, their voices a cacophony of desperation. Oswald, the man at the center of it all, was a magnet for hatred and fascination. His every word, every glance, was dissected, analyzed, as if it could unlock the secret of why a president lay dead. But Oswald gave nothing away, his silence as provocative as his cryptic claims. The tension built, a coiled spring ready to snap, as the world waited for a confession that never came. Then, on the morning of November 24th, the drama reached its fever pitch. Oswald was to be transferred from city jail to the county facility, a routine move that would become anything but. The basement of police headquarters was a circus, reporters and cameramen packed shoulder to shoulder, their lenses trained on the corridor where Oswald would appear. The air was thick with anticipation, the scent of sweat and cigarette smoke mingling with the hum of live broadcasts. Officers flanked Oswald, his hands cuffed, his face set in that same unreadable mask. But in the crowd, another figure waited, his presence unnoticed in the chaos. Jack Ruby, a nightclub owner with a pockmarked face and a heart burning with vengeance, stood poised, his .38 Colt Cobra concealed beneath his coat. Ruby was a man of contradictions, known to police, tied to the underworld, yet fiercely loyal to Kennedy, a president he saw as a beacon of hope. His eyes locked on Oswald, his pulse racing, his fingers itching for justice, or something darker. At 11:21 a.m., the moment arrived. Oswald stepped into the basement, the cameras whirring, the crowd surging forward. Time slowed, each second a heartbeat in the collective pulse of a nation. Ruby moved, swift and deliberate, a predator emerging from the shadows. "You killed my president, you rat!" he roared, his voice raw with fury, as he raised his gun. The shot was deafening, a single crack that echoed off the concrete walls. Oswald gasped, his body folding as the bullet tore into his abdomen, a crimson stain spreading across his sweater. The basement erupted in pandemonium. Reporters screamed, officers lunged, cameras captured every agonizing second. Ruby was tackled, his gun clattering to the floor, his face a mask of grim satisfaction. Oswald writhed, his eyes wide with shock, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Medics rushed him to Parkland Hospital, the same hospital where Kennedy had died 2 days earlier, but the wound was fatal. At 1:07 p.m., Lee Harvey Oswald was pronounced dead, his secrets buried with him, his silence a final taunt to a world desperate for answers. The nation reeled, its grief now laced with disbelief. The assassin was dead, killed on live television in a moment so surreal it seemed scripted. But the questions only multiplied, each one a dagger in the heart of certainty. Why had Ruby acted? Was it a grieving patriot's rage, or a calculated move to silence a man who knew too much? Ruby claimed it was impulse, a desire to spare Jackie Kennedy the pain of a trial, but his ties to organized crime, his late-night visits to police headquarters, whispered of deeper motives. The Dallas police, already under scrutiny for their handling of Oswald's security, faced a firestorm of criticism. How had a civilian slipped through with a gun? The scene replayed endlessly on television, Ruby's snarl, Oswald's collapse, the chaos of a nation unmoored. The drama of those 3 days, Kennedy's death, Oswald's capture, Ruby's deadly shot, had gripped the world like a fever dream, each moment more shocking than the last. In the aftermath, the government scrambled to restore order. President Lyndon B. Johnson, thrust into a role he never sought, established the Warren Commission on November 29, 1963, to investigate the assassination. Led by Chief Justice Earl Warren, the commission worked for 10 months, sifting through thousands of documents, interviewing hundreds of witnesses. Its report, released in September 1964, was a tome of certainty in an uncertain time. Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, firing 3 shots from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. The first missed, the second struck Kennedy's back and throat, the third delivered the fatal head wound. No conspiracy, no second shooter, no shadowy cabal. Jack Ruby, too, acted alone, driven by grief and impulse. The report was meant to close the book, to lay the nation's doubts to rest. But its conclusions, so neatly packaged, only deepened the suspicion. Witnesses claimed shots from the grassy knoll. The magic bullet theory, which posited a single bullet causing multiple wounds, strained credulity. Discrepancies in timelines, ballistics, and Oswald's murky past fueled a growing chorus of disbelief. The conspiracy theories bloomed like dark flowers, each one more seductive than the last. The CIA, furious over Kennedy's handling of the Bay of Pigs, had motive. The Mafia, targeted by Kennedy's brother Robert, had means. Anti-Castro Cubans, betrayed by Kennedy's refusal to invade Cuba, had rage. The Soviets, locked in a Cold War dance, had opportunity. Even elements within the U.S. government, wary of Kennedy's push for peace, whispered in the shadows. Oswald's ties to Russia, his pro-Castro activities, his mysterious trip to Mexico City weeks before the assassination. These were threads in a tapestry of doubt that no commission could unravel. The Warren Report, meant to be a bomb, became a lightning rod, its pages dissected by skeptics who saw not answers, but a cover-up. Books, documentaries, and whispers in smoky bars kept the mystery alive, each theory a siren's call to a nation hungry for truth. The drama of those days in Dallas resolved with Oswald's death and the Warren Commission's verdict, but the resolution was a hollow one. The nation mourned, its flags at half-mast, its people haunted by images of a pink-clad widow and a bloodstained limousine. Yet the questions lingered, their allure as potent as a lover's whisper. Who really pulled the trigger? Was Oswald a lone gunman, or a scapegoat sacrificed to protect a greater secret? What drove Ruby to kill, and who stood behind him in the shadows? The story of Kennedy's assassination, with its pulse-pounding moments and unanswered riddles, refuses to fade. It beckons, teasing with the promise of truths just out of reach. And somewhere, in the labyrinth of history, the answers wait, perhaps to be uncovered in the next chapter of this saga, a tale that will unravel more secrets and draw you deeper into the mystery. Stay tuned to my channel, where the next part of this haunting story awaits, ready to pull you back into the heart of Dallas, 1963, and the enigma that changed the world.